Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Pastyatya Desatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhischa Kriva Sindhu Pevacha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we want to welcome all the devotees. Thank you. Many of you have come from so many faraway places like America and other third world countries. Hare Krishna. Anyway. So, what we had decided, we were going to make an attempt to open up a little bit of one of the most deepest philosophical scriptures that is available with Vaishnava culture. It's called Manah. It's very personal in the sense that it's Raghunath Das Goswami's bhakti. And in his expression of bhakti, he jumps from two levels. He takes the role of an ordinary practitioner, and then also he jumps out of that role and comes into his role as an eternal associate of Srimati Radharani in the spiritual world. So the verses sort of align with his different moods. He's teaching, but he's also expressing his own internal moods and showing us by example that unless we have the cooperation of our mind, we can't really make any tangible progress in spiritual life. So it's called Manah Shiksha, which is called instructions to the mind, but the Acharyas have added another word, the best of all instructions to the mind. And he addresses his mind in every verse. There are 11 verses. And he addresses his mind in different ways. And he's also teaching us that we have to bring the mind on board in a way that it aligns itself with our goal. Because the mind is the center of the yoga system. The mind is the center of all of the activities we perform. But the mind, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says, it's a non-devotee. Hare Krishna. So we also know, as devotees, we're not supposed to associate with non-devotees. So that non-devotee is hanging around. So that means we have to preach to the mind, and that's what he does. And he approaches his mind as in different ways. He calls it my dear mind, my uncomprehending mind. He sometimes cajoles the mind in a very humorous way. And other times he just orders the mind. So he's approaching it in different ways. And each of the verses are what we say instructions to the mind. So the first 3 verses, he's teaching us how we should direct our mind. Now, bhakti consists of 2 aspects of the same activities. The activities are the same, But there are two levels, or two, what we say, not mutually exclusive but inclusive at the same time. They're defined exclusively, but they work inclusively. In other words, they work together. And that is the science of bhakti. Bhakti is a great science. It's the science of awakening our natural love for Krishna, which is ultimately the only real goal of life. Unless the living entity focuses on that as the goal of life, they will actually never feel satisfied and will have to come back life after life until they've reached that stage of consciousness, pure love for Krishna. And so in that understanding, there is the process of bhakti. And how to awaken the soul's it's natural to love Krishna. Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sarukabunoi Sravanadi Siddhi Chitte Kodiye Yudoi. So no matter what body a living entity has, in that living entity's existence, there is pure love for Krishna. There may be in the body of a tree, a body of an ant, a body of a demigod, whatever falls into the 8,400,000 categories of species. All living entities are parts and parcel of Krishna. They have an eternal loving relationship with Krishna. And the process of bhakti is the way to awaken it and bring it foremost, which is what we might say, the ultimate success of the living entity's existence. When that is achieved, there's nothing else to achieve. Because there is anything else that is worth achieving. And no one feels anything else necessary to achieve when they awaken their love for Krishna. They have understood everything. So now, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he taught the process of bhakti, but he taught it on a higher level. Because bhakti is divided in, we call it sadhana bhakti. There's sadhana bhakti, there's bhava bhakti, and there's prema bhakti. Bhakti in three categories. And it's a progression that moves the living entity from different stages of realization of their relationship with Krishna and goes through the various stages. The sadhana bhakti is divided into two. It's called Vaidhi bhakti, following the principles that we do, the rules and regulations, going to the Mangal Arti, chanting our rounds, reading and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, associating and serving devotees, worshipping the Lord in his deity form, taking Krishna Prasadam, and whatever activities we are given by the spiritual leaders to carry out, that's all within the category of sadhana or Vaidhi bhakti. But Vaidhi bhakti is not the goal. The goal is to come to the stage of natural attraction to Krishna, because that natural attraction is already there, as we mentioned. It has to be awakened. So Raghunath Das Goswami, what he's doing, he's showing us two paths of bhakti, the inner path and the outer path. It's called the exoteric path and the esoteric path. And when we practice the activities of devotional service, we're practicing the process of exoteric. But as that develops, there is a mood of bhakti that awakens in a particular way that draws one's attraction to Krishna in a certain mood. And these moods are called rasas, or mellows, or relationships with Krishna. Now, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radha and Krishna. He's Krishna. But he's got the mood of Radharani. So his teachings are all centered around the mood of Vrindavan, not the mood of Vaikuntha. We worship the Vaikuntha deities like Nrsingadev, Ram, and all of the different manifestations of the Vaikuntha deities, Who else do we worship? Vamanadev and Varahadev. These are all manifestations of the Supreme Lord who have their mood of within the Vaikuntha realm. Sri Chaitanya is not teaching any of that. He's teaching the mood of Vrindavan. And Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas, especially going back to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, all center around their goal as Vrindavan. Although we may worship the other deities, as according to our tradition and the practice given to us by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we're meant to awaken our attraction to Krishna in Sri Vrindavan Dham. And that's what Raghunath Das Goswami is doing when he's giving his dictations to the mind. He's showing us how to focus on the mood of Vrindavan. Now, the exoteric path, which is the external path, can be, what we say, done in a way that it looks like it's all right, but it's not. In other words, you can cheat on that level. You can present yourself as being a devotee simply by following the rules and regulations. But you may have other desires, you may have other motivations, you may just be doing it for whatever reason. You may not understand the goal, and you may just do it because it might be nice. And if you think that simply by successfully executing the external path, you can reach perfection, you fall short of the understanding given to us by the acharyas, and even Srila Prabhupada. I'll read something that Prabhupada actually said in that relationship. Because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati saw that many people were pretentiously executing their devotional service, but internally there was no development. There was no real bhakti that was actually developing. The internal path cannot be cheated. You're there, and you're either there or you're not there. You can't fake it. And that is the mood of what Raghunath Das Goswami is teaching us. Let me see if I can find that statement by Srila Prabhupada, which is, he's giving us that understanding. Thus, by hearing about the pure love of the residents of Raj, devotees will worship me on the path of spontaneous love, abandoning all rituals and religiosities and fruitive activities. So what does that mean? Prabhupada's purport. Many realized souls, such as Raghunath Das Goswami and King Kulashekar, have recommended with great emphasis that one develop his spontaneous love of Godhead, even at the risk of transgressing all traditional codes of morality and religiosity. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, has written in his prayer called the Manah Siksa that one should simply worship Radha and Krishna with all attention. Nadanam, 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 srutagana, niruktam kila kuru. One should not be much interested in performing Vedic rituals or simply following rules and regulations. So we follow rules and regulations because that's part of the process. But that's not the goal. Even if you're expert at following rules and regulations, still, if you haven't really developed that attraction for Krishna in a loving way, you're still missing the goal. And therefore, Lord Chaitanya says, I'm not moved by people, by devotees, who simply stay on the process of rules and regulations. He said, I'm only attracted to that bhakti which is spontaneously attracted to Krishna in Vrindavan. So this is what Raghunath Das Goswami is saying. And then here, this is a little longer. This is from the Bhakti Vinod Thakur in his Jaiva Dharma. And then one Goswami, he says, the Manah Shiksha has laid down a systematic procedure for one to enter into and become absorbed in the pastimes of Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. One should follow it without guile. One should practice one's bhajan according to the bhava of ecstatic love expressed in the Sri Swaniyama Dasa Sotram. Hare Krishna. And then he says, these 5 books have been composed by Raghunath Das Goswami. So you might say, wow, where are we going? Okay. Srila Rupa Goswami has exhaustively elaborated upon the details of Rasa Tattva. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally gave him this service and specially blessed him to fulfill the responsibility. However, the method by which an aspiring soul may develop such rasa in the intimate service of Radha and Krishna have been compiled by Raghunath Goswami in his famous dayas from Swarup Damodar Goswami. Now, Swarup Damodar Goswami taught Vakreshwar Pandit the external path, and he taught Raghunath Das Goswami the internal path. Now, even those who are aspiring for the external path, the internal path, they follow all of the activities of those on the external level. Because the external path and the internal path, from the external point of view, looks exactly the same. The only difference is the consciousness of the practitioner. And that is the difference between what we say attaining love of God and simply performing the activities of devotional service. And then Goswami said, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed Swarup Damodar to disseminate rasa upasanam, the process of bhajan inculcated with ras. Accordingly, he composed his diary on rasa upasanam comprising of 2 sections, the esoteric internal means of attainment, and exoteric external means of attaining. The esoteric process was entrusted to Raghunath Das Goswami, and the external to Rakeshwar Pandit. The exoteric path was passed on to me by Sri Vakreshwar Pandit, and from me to Dayana Chandra, who compiled it in a book. So what we're saying is, we don't pretentiously or surreptitiously or imitationally jump to the internal path. One has to perfect the activities that are given. And the main activity is to perfect one's chanting. Developing the quality of coming to the stage at least to what is called, chanting in namabhas, free from the offenses. As long as we're still chanting with offense, we can't move into the internal path. It's not possible. As long as we're still trying to find happiness through material activities, we can't move into the internal path. So one has to focus the activities which are done by everyone. We all chant Hare Krishna, we all read and study these books. But the internal path, there is one element on the internal path that is a little different than the external path. But it may also be done by those who are practicing the external path, but it's what you say, inherent in the internal path, and that's preaching. Because the internal path is the mood of the residents of Vrindavan, which is to bring others to Krishna, especially in the ultimate rasa, which is the Madhurya rasa, the gopis. The gopis' mood, especially the manjaris, are meant to bring other living entities to Krishna for Krishna's pleasure and for the purification of those living entities. So preaching is more or less in the mood of the internal path. So those who take up preaching, they're actually following in the footsteps in the residents of Vrindavan. That's one aspect of it. And Raghunath Das Goswami, in the first 3 verses, he tells us how to direct our mind, where we should do, what we shouldn't be, in terms of our general practice. And then verses 4, 5, 6, and 7, which I gave to Bhuta Bhavana to handle, is all about, what is it about?
Things to avoid.
Huh?
Things not to do.
Our anarthas, the big monsters that come as lust, anger, greed, illusion, pride, envy, like that. And how Raghunath Das Goswami chastises his mind in such a way that he scolds his mind for looking in that direction to find happiness through these different moods, or different anarthas. And then verse number 8, we move back into the mood of Vrindavan. Then 9, 10, and 11 is all about Radharani. And the last verse is the Falastuti, which is the benefit that one gets from hearing these verses. So simply by hearing them, to understand them will take some time. And it also aligns itself with our practice. As we practice, we can understand more and more of this mood. And we'll go into the details because each of the verses, he gives many instructions to his mind and how he wants to direct his mind in the mood of Vrindavan. So it's quite interesting. He'll see, he'll jump from an ordinary sadhaka to an internal resident, to an eternal resident of Vrindavan. So you'll see that. It's interesting because he's actually Rati Manjari in the spiritual world, and his service is to assist Rupa Manjari in serving Srimati Radharani personally. So he's a personal associate and servant of Radharani. And he's comprised this whole beautiful prayer called Vilapa Kusumanjali, which is his loving expressions towards Srimati Radharani, which is being done now in the form of purports by His Holiness Shiva Ram Maharaj. Has done 3 books already, covering the 96 verses spoken by. And also they're so deep. But you might say, well, I'm not on that level. Well, it doesn't matter. It's good to hear this. It's good to understand what is the topmost and what we should be aspiring for. It doesn't matter what level you are. Because by practicing the external path and thinking, by perfecting the external path, we have perfected our devotional service. Not really. Until we develop those internal moods. And what is those internal moods? They awaken by practicing the external path. So there are 2 types of people who perform the external path. Those who are on the external path and those who are on the internal path. They still act like ordinary devotees. They don't roll on the ground or talk about their internal mood in public or even exhibit their ecstatic symptoms. They keep that within their heart, and you can't even tell who has it and who doesn't have it. But it's there. Sometimes it comes out, just like sometimes you see Srila Prabhupada, he would be speaking, and all of a sudden he'd stop and then he'd go into an internal mood, and all the devotees would be sitting there, and they would think, what happened? And then Prabhupada, and it seemed like a year, but it was only 1 minute, and Prabhupada would be in that mood, and then he would come out, and then he'd say, have kirtan. He couldn't even, So, but Prabhupada never did that voluntarily. It was so spontaneous because of his love for Krishna that it just came out sometimes. Sometimes it happens that a devotee who's on that higher platform will exhibit these internal moods. But they try to restrain them because people either don't understand or they may also think it's some kind of show. Like that. But these things are actually the goal of Krishna consciousness. So these 11 verses are really deep, and I don't think I'm even 10% qualified to give this presentation, but I think it's so necessary that devotees hear about actually what we are meant to achieve, and that is the mood of Vrindavan, because all of our acharyas are in the mood of Vrindavan. They're not in the Vaikuntha mood like that. Although we worship these other deities, but we don't really. Of course, if your mood is Vaikuntha, then you find that to be more attractive. But ultimately, as a lineage, we are, in the mood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's teaching the internal path, like that. So it's interesting. It is deep, and it's also quite funny the way he talks to his mind. I think Bhuta Bhavana will be able to give an animated description of what his verses are about. Because he speaks in such direct terms. He calls his mind when he is one who is, what is it? The prostitute that's dancing in my heart. And he calls that, what is that, lust or is that pride? Pride. Huh? The first verse, he says, in the first verse he gives us where the mind should be focused. And in the end of the last verse he says, and you can't do it if you still have pride. So then he says, give up pride. He's talking to his mind, but we can accept it as directions in our own practice. So this is pretty much a little bit of the introduction of what we're about to would you like to add something, Bhuta Bhava, in relationship to this, an overview, to something about this whole presentation? Because I think you can also add something. Yeah.
I guess the only thing I would add is that one angle I was thinking of is the process itself, Manah Siksha, and how important it is as an approach to understand that the mind in the conditioned state is like another entity. And when you were speaking, Maharaj, I was thinking about this point that it can be a very powerful sadhana to really see the mind that way, and as we see Raghunath Das Goswami do, to instruct the mind, to actually guide the mind, and to really see how we can focus the mind more and more in a deeper way on the actual, on the practice of Krishna consciousness. Because to the point that you made at the beginning, the mind is that central element that we have to bring into Krishna consciousness. And I was just thinking, Manah Bhava Bhakto, right? So there's twice Krishna's explaining that particular point, and then there's a whole series of verses about the mind can be the best friend or the worst enemy.
Right.
So I was just thinking about these whole series of verses. They also present a practice of actually taming the mind, and how spiritual life becomes much easier if we're able to get the mind to move in that direction.
He gives us things to focus on. He just doesn't say direct your mind. He says focus on these things. And this will bring your mind into the mood more and more of Vrindavan. And then he gives a whole long list, especially in the first 3 verses, like that. Yeah, so he's not just simply directing us, he's directing us in this very specific way. And Bhakti Prabhupada, in one lecture, he also said, never trust your mind. He says, always distrust, because the mind can cheat you at any minute. We also have that experience, and all of a sudden we are sitting there or chanting japa, and pretty soon we're in downtown London, shopping or doing something, or downtown New York. So yeah, the mind is just the way it is. It'll go wherever it wants to go, whenever it wants to go. But then there is a way to direct the mind, and Raghunath Das Goswami fortifies the intelligence as the director or the person or the force by which the mind can be moved towards the mood of Vrindavan, which is the mood we really want, because this is the essence of our practice. When we look up at the deities there, if we are still in the mood of rules and regulations, we can't see Radha and Krishna there. You can only see Radha and Krishna when you're on the spontaneous level. Otherwise, you're actually seeing Lakshmi Nrsimha. Lakshmi Narayan. Lakshmi Narayan. Because Radha and Krishna are not worshipped by Aishwarya Bhav, or what we say, the mood of awe and reverence. They're worshipped only by spontaneous loving devotion. So Prabhupada has given us Radha and Krishna worship, but actually we have to come to that consciousness to be able to worship the deities in the mood that they're meant to be worshipped. Then you can see Radha and Krishna. Otherwise, you're seeing Radha and Krishna, but actually your mood is more in the mood of Vaikuntha, which is awe and reverence, which is not wrong, but it is not the goal, actually. So, yeah. Any comments or questions? Would someone? Yes, Radha Vinodini. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for being able to come. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Thank you so much. This was already a very, I'm very inspired for what will come in the weekend. And you mentioned that the mind is, we can never trust the mind because we can always be cheated. And this was always a mystery for me that Krishna said in the Bhagavad Gita that we should make a friend out of our mind from the enemy, but usually we can trust a friend. And I was wondering if, because previously I understood that maybe if we reach a certain level, then a mind will be the friend, but based on what you said now, it's not like that. So how can we understand these two together?
When you develop the internal mood, and you're fixed in the internal mood, then the mind is the friend. It's not going to go anywhere because the internal mood is actually your focus, which is the mood of loving Krishna in a certain rasa, a certain way, and following those principles that lead to that loving relationship, such as worshipping those persons who have the same mood as you, who are residents of Vrindavan. But Raghunath Das Goswami is broader. He brings in a whole range of different things, persons, moods that we can focus on, which helps us to bring into that mood. So as long as we haven't reached that internal mood of loving relationship, then the mind. But even on the higher levels, sometimes the mind can also jump. We have the example, just like if as you make advancement in spiritual life, you become empowered. And that empowerment allows you to do so many, what we say, outstanding things within the process of devotional service. But if one somehow or other starts to think that this is due to my, advancement in devotional service, and forgets that it's a process of ultimately cultivating the mood of surrender and devotion, and Krishna empowers the person simply according to their level of practice. So what we achieve is our effort, but not the goal. The goal is given to us by the mercy of Krishna. So we have one example, and that was, I think his name was Rupa Kaviraj. And he had reached the level of bhava, which is very high. That means he's on that platform of spontaneous devotion. And he was quite known as a great speaker, and he knew the Vedas well, and he had all good qualities. So one time, when he was giving a lecture, one very senior female disciple came, and she sat down in the back. Her name was Krishna Priya. And her quality was she could not stop chanting. She had developed an attraction for the holy name that she was constantly chanting 24 hours a day. So when she came to his lecture, she was chanting while he was speaking. And he somehow noticed it. And he stopped his talk and directed his criticism at her. Oh, you're chanting and you're sitting here, you're not listening. Why have you come? So she didn't say anything. She just remained quiet. And then he said a few other things. But after a while, he fell down. He lost his position in bhakti because she was a pure devotee. And he had offended a pure devotee. And because of that, so what was that offense? He had some pride. He still had a little bit of pride that somehow just came out during a certain circumstance. He was used to having everyone, be attentive in his lectures. And everyone loved his lectures. He was a great orator. And he was fixed in devotional service. But that little pride caused him to commit offense. When you commit offense to a pure devotee, Krishna doesn't tolerate that. Even if you are a pure devotee, you can't offend another pure devotee. But pure devotees don't offend other pure devotees. But he still had that little tinge of pride that was still there. So that's the first thing that Raghunath Das Goswami asks us to remove. Get rid of that pride. Because it's easy to get rid of lust, generally. Just don't pay attention to it. But pride, even if you don't pay attention to it, it'll pay attention to you. And you can't even see it. It's so subtle. And it comes out sometimes actually when you see it, you think, oh, wow, am I like that? So that's the first thing he says. Get rid of this pride. And then you can move quickly into the mood of Vrindavan.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else would like to offer Sri Devi?
Thank you, Maharaj, for this introductory class. Maharaj, as we were speaking about the exoteric path, where we are following the rules and regulations and maybe even sometimes doing it in a ritualistic way, I was thinking of the 6 unfavorable practices, one of which is niyamagraha, where one is simply following rules and regulations for the sake of following, but not with a view to advancing.
That's a perversion of the path, yeah.
So, is that what is being described here also?
Yeah, that's one element.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Bhaktisiddhanta, he emphasized the internal path. And Srila Prabhupada also emphasized the internal path. But why? Because there are, let me see if I can find it here. It's easy to make the external path look like you're on it. You may not be, you may be far away from it. You can't cheat on the internal path. It's either there or not there. So one can. It says the inner esoteric path of Manah describes a practitioner's internal state of desire, motivation, and emotional progress from spiritual inclination and orientation through increasingly deep and subtle purification to fully realize spiritual service. Raghunath Das Goswami in many cases described corresponding external behaviors only using metaphor. So the persons on the internal path or developing it that are in that mood, they still follow the activities of the external path, because the external path. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati gave us a diagram where he put both paths in the diagram showing how they actually complement each other, but still they are distinct, at the same time complementary. And then he also talks about Bhaktisiddhanta says that why did Bhaktisiddhanta did not teach the outer path to his followers? He didn't teach the outer path, he taught the inner path. But in many places and in many ways gave instructions that parallel the inner path. The first misuse is an exclusive or nearby exclusive emphasis on attaining the mood of Radha Manjari gopis. So we saw that when Prabhupada was here, there was a group of people who had formed a group called the Gopi Baba Club. And they were actually putting on dresses of gopis, the men, and peacocks and others, and having meetings and discuss it. So in other words, people were surreptitiously or pretentiously jumping to that path, saying it's authorized, but they weren't authorized. They weren't qualified. So that became a misuse of that, and a great travesty. The mood of Radha Sakhi gopis is usually excluded, often with some disdain. What to speak of the mood of parental, and so people on that path also reject these other moods. Instead of a guru adding a practitioner to unfold and nurture an individual's own spontaneous awakening, a pseudo-guru prescribes the same generic Manjari Gopi mood to everyone. Oh, come, I'll teach you how to become a resident of Vrindavan. The internal path is required, so I'm going to teach you. But what is that person's adhikari, qualification? What is their level of advancement? So there's gurus who exclude any kind of discrimination, and they welcome everyone. So that was very prominent when Bhaktisiddhanta was there. Therefore, he emphasized the internal path, which cannot be cheated. Cannot be. The second one is to exclusively go into solitary bhajan and thinking that I've made it, So these are some of the deviations that was there when Bhaktisiddhanta was preaching. So he also emphasized the internal path. You can't cheat on that level. You're either there or you're not. But therefore we have to aspire for the internal mood and still practice the external path. And there are different symptoms of advancement as one moves along the stages of bhakti. And those symptoms are described by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur gives two different types of commentaries on these verses. One is called Bhajana. What is it called? Bhajana? Darpanam. Darpanam means mirror or reflection. What is that bhajan? What is it reflecting? And the other one is Bhasya. He sings the glories of the internal mood. Both of these are included in this particular presentation. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is pretty much the main acharya to comment on Raghunath Das Goswami's work. So we can read his commentaries also. So you might think, maybe I came to the wrong retreat. I hope not. This is necessary because there is a strong statement by Lord Chaitanya. It's very direct. Rules and regulations don't attract me. They don't attract me. Only those who are developed a spontaneous mood of devotion actually are following Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions. But we follow it up to the point when we get to the point of spontaneous attraction. And that's there. It's not something you have to create. It's not something you have to somehow build upon. All you have to do is follow the processes given by your bona fide spiritual master. But develop that eagerness by following the mood of the residents of Vrindavan. And that comes gradually. And Raghunath Das Goswami is teaching us how to do it. He's giving us a little bit of an upgrade so we can understand what is that path and how to practice it. Yes, Raj.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Thank you for the introduction, Maharaj. I had 3 questions actually, but the first one I had was, why do you feel Prabhupada didn't emphasize the commentaries of the 6 Goswamis that we're studying, or that Sriram Swami, like we're going into depth into these commentaries? Why do you feel Prabhupada didn't give emphasis? Like, why did Prabhupada not give commentaries himself? Or do you feel like he didn't have enough time, or he felt it wasn't important, or he summarized it all on everything
Yes, you're saying Prabhupada didn't give commentaries on the Goswami's works?
Yeah.
He did. Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami is Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is our main scripture. It teaches us the path of spontaneous devotional service in different stages. It teaches sadhana bhakti all the way up to Bhava Bhakti and Prema Bhakti also. So Rupa Goswami, but where did Rupa Goswami get his knowledge from? Directly from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So yeah, Prabhupada mentions that many times in his lectures, the importance of reading, studying, and understanding the works of Rupa Goswami. Especially Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and also Upadeshamrita, which is a condensed version of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is really, the last 2 verses in Nectar of Instruction is Radhakunda, attaining the highest principle of Vrindavan by qualifying oneself to actually enter into the mood of Radharani's personal kund. So Prabhupada, when he finished that book, he said, distribute it to everybody. And go out and distribute it. The devotee says, this is not for the... Prabhupada says for everybody. So he was giving that to everyone to read. Of course, maybe they wouldn't understand, but it was there that they could at least get a glimpse of what bhakti is and what is the actual goal. Yeah. So those two books are highly recommended, and Prabhupada really pushed Nectar of Instructions also. I just did a seminar on Nectar of Instructions, and I found it really, really deep. And so Prabhupada didn't do a lot of commentaries because commentaries were already done. Just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur did a lot of commentaries on Rupa Goswami's work, especially Nectar of Instructions. And the other acharyas, Vishwanath Chakravarti. So Prabhupada took the commentaries of the previous acharyas, and when he was formulating his Bhaktivedanta purports, he was studying their commentaries and then adding his own realization with the understanding that the Western mind may not be able to fully comprehend what the acharyas are giving in the form of their commentary. So he extended their commentaries by adding that element where it would be more easily understandable for those who are not familiar with the Vedic culture. Yeah. But Prabhupada did do commentaries. He did it on Srimad Bhagavatam, he did it on Chaitanya Charitamrita. I mean, CC is like, whoa. When you read that, you think, where am I? Especially the later chapters and on Anchalila. I mean, that's Rupa Goswami's, the first Anchalila chapter. The verses in there are Rupa Goswami's ecstasies and bhakti, and Prabhupada gives purports on them. So mainly he focused on Rupa Goswami because he knew that he was the prominent acharya for us to follow. Jiva Goswami is a little harder to understand, but then he also, Prabhupada said, you should read, Tattva Sandarbha, which is Jiva Goswami. He also recommended we read Jiva Goswami. And Prabhupada wanted to do a lot of other commentaries on under Goswami's literature, but he just didn't have the time. He was focusing mostly on preaching and traveling. And he focused on Bhagavatam and CC. These are the two things. I forgot what he said. He was going to give commentary on one particular scripture. Can't remember what it was. Do you remember? No?
Mahabharata, was it?
No?
Manu Samhita? Manu Samhita.
Oh, Brahma Samhita?
Manu Samhita.
Manu Samhita, yeah. Prabhupada said Manu Samhita, which is really the law books of mankind. Because if you read those Manu Samhita, you think, how does this apply? But therefore, you need a commentary on those in order for you to understand Manu Samhita. And as far as I know, the closest thing that was done was by Sanatana Goswami when he did Hari Bhakti Vilas. Includes some of the principles of Manu Samhita, which are mostly for grihastas. Mostly for grihastas. Okay.
And do you see many people reaching that internal state in experience?
You can't really tell. You can get some idea, but you can't really tell simply by watching their external activities because they follow. Like everyone else follows. They chant Hare Krishna. They perform all of the activities of devotional service, but their mood is different. And you don't reveal your internal mood either. That's one thing. That is, that if you reveal your internal mood, you may also lose the quality of that mood. So the only person you can reveal it to is your spiritual master, and it's not that your spiritual master teaches you, he helps you once you start reaching that stage, then he moves you along. Then he can be a guide to help you going into that, deeper into that mood. And if your spiritual master is not personally present, someone who is on the same level of your spiritual master, you may also approach. But you don't make it, it's not for a general discussion. Just like when Prabhupada was asked, well, who are you in the spiritual world? He said, that you don't require. In other words, none of your business. And when he was asked again by another person, he said, if I told you, you'd faint. So Prabhupada was Nitya Siddha, and he also indicated that he came to do this work. He was not he didn't take birth under karma. There's a beautiful statement by one astrologer, which I have read a few times, maybe you heard it, how he predicted Srila Prabhupada's internal mood in his preaching, mostly in his preaching, back in 1970, even before Prabhupada had started his movement in a big way. Yeah. I think I can read that. It's somewhere on my phone. Should I read it? It's pretty heavy. Maybe some of you have heard it. The question is, where is it? I think I can find it, but it might take me a little while to get to it. Okay, there's two persons I think might have sent it to me. Is Shyamala here? You're the one that sent it to me, right? The astrologer, Govinda Dasi? Yeah. I think I have it from what you sent me. Yeah. This is interesting. Prabhupada was, we don't really know much about Prabhupada. We're just getting an indication of what he gave us, but who is he? Who is this personality? Oh. So I'm getting closer and closer. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, got it. So Govinda Dasi found some old Indian newspapers, 1970, in her attic, in boxes, and one had an article about Srila Prabhupada written by an astrologer, and this is what it said. No one can read this chart. If they say they can, they're simply lying. This personality comes and goes as his own sweet will. He is not bound by anyone or anything. The stars are lined up perfectly. There's no question of karma. He is working directly under the will of God. And when he writes, his pen does not have in it ink. His pen has in it fire, which will burn the ignorance of the whole world. That was written in 1970. Hare Krishna. So, and Prabhupada also, we know from scriptures that even Krishna predicted his appearance. That's mentioned in Brahma Vaivarta Purana, that there will be a great personality who will come and take the chanting of my holy name through all corners of the world. And this was spoken by Krishna to Mother Ganga more than 5,000 years ago. So Prabhupada was Nitya Siddha. He came to do this work. So if we follow Prabhupada, then we don't have to worry about our Krishna consciousness. Everything is secure. It's all there. Okay, you had a third question?
Yes, sorry. The third question was about Nityananda. Because you're mentioning about the gopis bringing people to Krishna. So how do we understand Nityananda's mood? Because he was also the Panchatattva, but mainly Nityananda. What was his position, and what's the distinction now?
Well, the Chaitanya Charitamrita mentions that the guru comes from either one of two tattvas. The tattva of Nityananda or the tattva of Radharani. So Nityananda is guru, he is guru tattva. He represents the eternal spiritual master, and although he's the Lord, he is serving Lord Chaitanya as his object of service. Therefore he's in the mood of God, who is in the mood of service, which is the mood of guru. So that's his mood, to teach the process of devotional service through his own example. And he also teaches too. But mostly he taught by example. So CC mentions, Guru comes from one of the two tattvas, Radharani or Nityananda Balaram, which are non-different. Okay? Yeah, so that's Nityananda. But Nityananda is a madman. And he does what he wants whenever he wants. And he's always laughing. He's always in transcendental ecstasy. So it's hard for him to teach because he's always in ecstasy. So, if you read the story of pastimes, Chaitanya Bhagavat is written by Vrindavan Das Thakur. And Vrindavan Das Thakur is a disciple of Nityananda. So when he writes, although it's about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, a large portion of that scripture is all about Nityananda, because that's his guru. Yeah, so that's nice. But don't try to follow Nityananda. Just follow what he says, what he's teaching us also. Anything else? Anyone else? There's a hand way in the back there. I can't see the person.
How can you protect we have Sadaka Maharaj. We are in the I'm talking about me. I am in the external mood. How can I...
No, wait a minute, I don't think anybody can hear you. Just wait a minute.
How can the devotees like us, like me, protect ourselves who are in the external mood, or protect ourselves from not coming offenses to those devotees who are in the internal mood? And because those who are in the external mood, they may also have some pride by doing things externally better than the one.
Yeah, you
might
misunderstand their activities, because sometimes they don't follow the rules, and therefore you might find some reasons to find fault, which is an offense. So better not to find fault with anybody. That's the best thing. And even if you see something you don't understand, if you want to understand it, you should ask someone who may be able to, who's an advanced devotee, saying, well, this is the way he's acting, and he's supposed to be a advanced devotee. So maybe you can tell me, why is he acting the way he's acting? We may not understand, therefore it's better not to say anything or get some advice from someone who is also, we may say, fixed in devotional service, and someone who's on the level of spiritual master. because Prabhupada did certain things that were somewhat critical. I mean, he had to adjust many things when he went to the West in order to preach. And some of those adjustments, he was criticized for that. And so they didn't understand, but Prabhupada showed that these adjustments actually proved to be beneficial in spreading Krishna consciousness. Especially the major one was that the tradition was, coming from India, that generally women and men wouldn't be worshipping in the same place together. The women would come into the temples and worship. They would live in the homes. They would never live in temples. There was no such thing as brahmacharini ashram. Prabhupada saw the culture, and he knew that to try to separate them and then make it distinct like it's in India would be impossible, and he wouldn't be able to really preach. So he gave women equal status in terms of the practice of devotional service. And he said, because I did that, I was successful. But that's the Acharya can do that. And sometimes a senior devotee will have to adjust a situation to make it favorable. So if we don't understand the adjustment, or you think he's not following the rules, then you may also find yourself, being critical. So best to ask if you're not sure someone. That's the safest way. Thank you. Anyone else? We don't want to take too much time. We can go on to Kirtan, because that's the last part of tonight's program, and then we're asking everyone. I know it's everyone who's been traveling. It may be hard to get up for Mangal Arati tomorrow, but if you can, come. But at least come for japa and for the rest of the program, and then Ekta and Achyuta will also keep us in tune of what's happening. So, right now we want to end, we don't want to stay too late. Do Kirtan up until 9? What time is it now? It's already past 9? Hare Krishna. So we might have to have a nocturnal Kirtan. Lord Chaitanya in the house of Srivas. So what should we do? I'm not going to try and manage this one. Should we begin some Kirtan, and whoever wants to stay can stay, and whoever wants to retire for the evening? Yeah.